Okay, so while we're getting this together, I just want to welcome everybody. I think it's around 10 o'clock, right? So I know everybody has time on their mind. So my name's Rebecca Hess, and I saw a lot of you at the keynote yesterday, so hopefully we can fill in some gaps. It felt like I was, splattering paint on the wall there for you, but basically what we're going to do today is we're going to go through, it might feel, not knowing your backgrounds at all, and I'm sure I have a mixture looking at who I'm looking at, that people who do research. We're going to do a little bit of a tutorial up front. So the first part of the session, or a little less than the first part of the session, will really be a tutorial on exactly what research is and understanding a little bit more about the methodology application. Then we're going to go into really looking hard at the methods, because that seems to be the missing link for us. And so I'm really going to sink down into that and give you some examples. And at that point, I think we need to kind of be talking back and forth. So, and so I'm always good with that. I always tell my students, if you have something to say, you don't need to raise your hand, but just, try not to interrupt one another or myself. So, but at that point, I think it will be more useful if you have comments or questions on what's going on. And then at the end, I really want to give you a really good look at what I found this past year looking at the scope of Pilates research, where I started mainly to because again, I just wanted to look at the scope. In other words, what exactly have we been doing and how have we been doing it? So when I found an incredible amount of Pilates research out there, while I wasn't surprised, I guess, on the same hand, I was. And so I started narrowing it, and I actually came to my best look at what's going on now when I narrowed the scope to the past 5 years. So, and I think it's good to know what's happened back there, but what is really going on is the research is updating itself. So it's not like we're missing something by not talking about, it is so dry in Phoenix. I'm like from the deciduous east, so if you see my lips get stuck together. So you're not missing what would be going on in the 1980s, because nothing has really changed in terms of what we're looking at. We're just looking at it differently. And in some cases, much better. So while you might hear a little bit of demise in what's going on, I think it's a good thing that we look at it and go, hey, let's get this together, so we can have the impact that we want to have. So that's basically how we'll do. So how many of you here actively do research? I know I'm looking at quite a few of you who presented, so great. And how many of you are not interested in doing research, but you want to understand it? In other words, you want to be a good consumer. I think this is really important. I know Sherry just has so many bags and hats. And, I know with my students, I taught research for a long time to undergraduate athletic training students. And I knew most of them would have no interest in pursuing research, even a thesis at the graduate level. But I had them in senior research, and I dedicated my focus in those classes to getting them to understand what is quality research. Because you can read stuff, it's like listening to the news, right? You're listening to it going, what's the truth here? What. And for me, when I listen to the news and they report research statistics, I can't watch it. This is why I don't watch the news. I only read BBC's that just update me on, so I know if I'm going to be under attack tomorrow or not. But essentially, when we extract information and just plop it into a news bite, you're missing an awful lot of information, and I just think it's irresponsible for the most part. So that's really what I'm here to kind of get across to you guys. Okay, so looks like we can start?
Yeah, I'm just waiting on power circle. You can go ahead.
I can go ahead? Okay, great.
We're getting there a couple chairs, Rebecca, too. Okay.
Oh, okay, all right. A clicker? Because she knows I'm a wanderer. Okay. Yes, I was saying that when I saw the podium, I will age myself, but I remember burning podiums in 1970. It's probably very disrespectful, but we won't tell anybody. Okay, so let's see. Here we go. Okay, so we're talking about developing and conducting quality research today. I love looking at old pictures of Joe Pilates and his work. Again, I came to you guys from the dance community only about, well, now it's been over 25 years ago that I've been studying Pilates as a student. When I started working with the woman that I work with, she said, oh, I think you should train and take the hours and become a teacher. And I was like, oh, no. I've been there. I want to be a student of what's going on. So I'm very interested in what you do. I teach in exercise science. So here's what I want you to think about. Thinking about or evaluating your own research. So when you're listening to what's going on today, your evaluation of quality research, what do you think it is? Thinking about research as a field of its own, which grows increasingly complex because it is its own field, and then becoming a consumer of research. Where are you in this? I want you to think about what you are doing. It was really interesting listening to the gentleman yesterday, Joe's attorney, okay? And he said, he was almost to the point of antisocial. He was so focused and detailed on what he was doing. Reminded me of the way we thought about Martha Graham. She also had that same characteristic, but very demanding on, I want it this way every time. So what are we doing? Is it doing what it's intended to do? What is it intended to do? And then think about Joe's development and application of exercise based primarily on experiential and intuitive knowledge. Mind-blowing when you think about it at that time. How Pilates exercise compares to traditional and or widely accepted similar tools. We're going to talk a lot about this today. It's not always that we want Pilates to be better than something else. I'm good if it's the same as. We want it to have similar impact as other well-established, valid fitness or movement tools. And then making the connection between Pilates exercise and applied sciences, I think is very important. And all of you certified teachers, and I'm sure others, have good backgrounds in kinesiology, functional anatomy, even applied biomechanics. So in this section, we're going to overview the research process through the data to data analysis. And then we're going to take a look at the scope of current research in Pilates at the end of the session. So where do I start? This is what we're going to talk about here. Okay, so this is the first session of this. My PowerPoint is up on the app in a PDF form. Okay, so that's up there for you. Research is simply the process of collecting information in order to form a decision and or develop knowledge. So think about that. Why is understanding research important to us? When I talk about us today, we, us, I'm talking about all of us collectively, wherever we're coming to this from. We need to stay current professionally and personally, and as an informed consumer of research. Really, really important. When you start reading research on whatever level you come into it, you need to understand, is this making sense? Is this doing what it needs to do? Is it saying accurately what it can actually say? Okay, and that's something that we're going to be talking about a lot. So in terms of defining and identifying research, we conduct research every day. I know all of you guys do. I mean, you just do. You do it through observation, notation, critical thought, evaluation. You do it at home, you do it at work, in your studios. Research can range from collecting information just to write a paper, such as you saw yesterday with some of the research presentations. They were systematic reviews or meta-analyses, so that they didn't collect information from human subjects, they collected information from other existing research. And this can be presented in an informal magazine article. I always tell my students, I'm teaching Phys of X right now to my grad students, and I tell them, when you're talking in the discussion board, you can't talk to me about Idea Journal or Fitness Journal. It has to come from a scholarly, peer-reviewed journal, okay? And what they're saying in Idea Journal and all of the other, what I refer to as informal magazines, okay, or industry magazines, different than a scholarly journal, they should be reporting from those scholarly journals, okay? And then more formal review, if you get into this, a review of the literature, which could extend into a more detailed systematic review, or then again meta-analysis. At any rate, you're forming a research proposal and collecting data if that's your ultimate goal. So again, I'm talking to you in two prongs as well. Some of you may just be interested in writing a paper and submitting it to an industry journal, and I think those are very good. But I want you to use good existing research to form your thoughts and ideas. So in those references, I shouldn't be seeing other references to fitness journals and softer magazines. I should be seeing applied research. Okay? So then it becomes incumbent upon you to understand how to read it, interpret it, evaluate it, and then say it back to us. So research can be identified and designed in a number of ways, and this is where it just kind of gets to be all over the place. In my Ph.D., I decided, because I had done a master's thesis and I just was so darn curious, that I wanted to know a little bit more about research, so I minored in research methods, which took me pretty deep into statistical analysis, but that was all cool because it helped in the end. But it really made me understand when Elizabeth said, could you come and talk to our teachers about this? I said, wow, it's kind of interesting because I never thought about research being a field of its own, and it really is. Types of research can range everywhere from, and these are just, like a spectrum, basic research, applied research, and clinical research. A lot of us in motor learning and control kind of started in that basic research where we were testing theoretical models. I came from a dynamical systems background, not motor programming. I think we organize our movement on the fly. We create these repertoires and pull from repertoires of existing movements in terms of the neural networking. I don't think we pre-program things, and so Richard Schmidt and I disagree on that. A lot of what's going on in Pilates right now is applied research, and there is a fair amount of clinical research going on in your field right now too, which is really a good thing for everyone. Research designs, I think this is the hardest thing for students of research to understand, because when I watch how people write their research designs, I want to really pull my hair out. It would be much simpler to say to people, if it's experimental or descriptive, if it's quantitative or qualitative, and basically you would need both of those. This is an experimental qualitative design, okay? And is it cross-sectional or is it longitudinal? Are you collecting data over a period of time or right now in a smaller amount of time? And then is it case to group or a selected cohort? We'll talk about that a lot more when we get into the details. But when you are reading that research and you get to the methods part of a primary article, and they'll say this is a randomized controlled trial, for example. That's not up there. You don't see that, do you? But actually, a randomized controlled trial is an experimental, quantitative design. And I would love to take everybody back to those roots of understanding that, because then we could have a common language. So you can see that even in our field of research, we've gotten so sophisticated that we are losing and contaminating the meaning of what the student can then identify with. Okay? I want to talk to you a moment about evidence-based practice. And a lot of people kind of look at this as a new type of research. And I don't think that's what Dr. Guyot was after. It was first termed by Gordon Guyot in 1992. And I put on the slides, because I knew I'd be putting them up in PDF, so you can go to any of these links at your leisure to look more at what their backgrounds are. I'm not going to do that because we would certainly not have enough time to do that. But he had a very interesting way of going about looking at what's going on in the human body and how we're using our research. I think this was something that frustrated me the most when I was starting my doctoral research. And I realized that I was really in for it, years of it, and that it would impact my life in ways that I hadn't quite anticipated. It would take me out of the studio more. It would change my way of thinking about certain things. But what it never changed was when you're moving and when you're watching people or teaching people movement, is it based in something real? Is it based in something that it should be? When I cue somebody to bring the shoulder over the hip before they contract, why? Why am I even saying that? I mean, these are things, as Sherry say, these are things that would keep me up at night. So I would leave the studio and go, what was I doing there? What was I saying? So here are the steps of EBP. And what it really is asking is, am I practicing what the evidence supports for my specific client? Okay, so am I practicing what the evidence supports for my specific client? And you may be thinking, well, I teach group classes, but I know you guys. When you're teaching group classes, you're looking at all those individuals. I know you are. You're teaching, if you've got 7 people in front of you on reformers, you're teaching 7 different classes, which is so awesomely cool, right? We all can't help ourselves. Even if I've got dancers doing a sequence, I've got 2 or 3 of them going, oh, okay, wait a minute, let's look at this, right? So let's do this. Okay. All right, clickers.
Right here.
Here we go.
And laser
great.
right there.
Okay, great. Thank you, Sharon. So first you want to formulate your specific question. Again, this is the same process that you're going to see here in the scientific process, but he was just a little bit more specific about this. Formulate a specific question, even if it's retrospective, you've already done it, right, or you've already collected the data. What did you question or observe as unique? Always be thinking about this. It's interesting. Research can be replicated, and that's a wonderful way to establish validity in the industry, but it's also really nice when you have a unique question to go back in and look at how other questions that were similar were done, and then model that. Search and review relevant and current literature using scholarly databases. Cannot emphasize that enough. Don't open magazines. I don't want to hear what the newspaper said. I could care less what your teacher thought, right? What is the research telling us? Evaluate the research. Consider all methodology. We're really going to talk about good ways to evaluate and interpret the research today. So again, if I am saying to you things that you're already very confident about, I apologize. Hopefully you'll take away something that you can put in your back pocket. So we want to evaluate the research, consider all methodology, including subject setting, testing, training, and procedures. Really keep those imprinted in your mind. We can't drop the ball anywhere here. This is where we're having trouble in our research in Pilates right now, right there at point 3. Make a decision and incorporate it into practice. So when you're reviewing this information and you see that it's suggested that we do curl-ups to engage more of the obliques in a neutral pelvis, for example, does the research support that? I kind of, I hear that a lot. When I'm working, in a neutral shoulder girdle, is that well supported in the research? Or do I really need to abduct the scapula more, which is going to take me out of neutral shoulder girdle, right? Neutral scapular position. So what is the research telling us about these things? And then evaluate the process, decisions, and outcomes. You have to make those decisions and incorporate them into your practice. And that's what he was really trying to get people to do. Dr. Guyot is an exercise science background, exercise physiologist, physician background. And so he was really looking at this a lot for that particular area, but it just really trickled down into athletic training, is really taking off there, and we also see it in physical therapy as well. So evidence-based practice in Pilates. Your research questions should be driven by the specific practice. And I'm using those words traditional or blended, and I have no clue either, and I know you don't either. I'm not sure what to do about, yes?
I'm going to say something that I wish Lisa Stoltz had said yesterday. She was in the research forum yesterday, and she wanted to make a comment, but we kind of stopped the discussion to move on to the next speaker. She published the article in JOSPT with John Childs,
right,
who said that she was the one that was driven to define Pilates in the research, because this is probably the highest quality research study that's ever been done on Pilates, because of the stringent evidence and definition of Pilates that needed to be done, because John Childs could see that there was no clear definition, that it was all over the map in
Right.
the research. So he said, I'm not going to help you publish the study unless you define this clearly. So
Right.
she called the PMA, she called all of us, and she said what he said was that it had to be the 34 exercises from Return to Life. That was the best definition of Pilates mat work that he could see from what the information she provided to him,
Right.
and what the PMA provided. So it had to be those exercises. And if they veered in any way, like modified or
Right.
different than those exercises, then it had to be clearly defined that it was Pilates based. And I think what was stated in her study was Pilates based.
And that's exactly, we're definitely going to be talking about that term.
34 exercises as done in Return to Life, it has to be clearly defined as to what it is.
And I think those are the terms that you're going to see. We're going to actually look at a study who came up about that and said that the Pilates-based definition would be a better way to actually define it, especially if you veer even from the method application, where a lot of these studies, when you look at them, aren't even talking about breathing. And for me, that was the essence of Pilates, was breathing.
This study is
So-
called developing a clinical prediction rule for who would benefit from Pilates with low back pain. That was the study that I'm quoting. Sorry, I couldn't remember it.
Just a clarifying point, the mat exercises that Joe promoted for gross, wide popular dissemination, but most of his work was on the apparatus.
Mm-hmm.
And the book,
So
Return
how
to
do you
Life, was
just-
written for a home program.
Right,
For
but
the masses to do.
his research, his development of his methodology, he did on his apparatus. He
Primarily the
spent
reformer.
enormous amount of time
But if you look
developing the
at
apparatus.
the videos of the man in the studio
Yeah.
doing some mat work where he's got probably ankylosing spondylitis or something, and his spine is really stiff and he's pushing on his back, that was mat work. So there was some mat work done, but I'd have to interview some of the elders to find out how much mat work was done, because most people talk about being on the reformer.
So those are definitely issues that you are struggling with, okay? And you can see this is a very sensitive, and yesterday I saw it become a very personal, and I think you have to be very careful about this. I saw this happen in dance when I first started working with IADMS, and I've published with their journal, Dance, Exercise, and Science, and that when I say we did modern dance for 10 weeks, so what? What do you mean by this? And again, this is only something I think that a dancer can understand. So this is something that you have to struggle with and come to grips with. I'm going to give you some suggestions as we go, but I think it's something that you definitely have to acquire a terminology that is common to you. You have to come to an agreement on this. That's the call that you're going to hear me make again and again today. This is on you to do this for one another. So there will have to be some letting down and dropping of egos and experiential backgrounds to come to some common place where you can move forward now. Okay. Again, I've seen this struggle with dance. I've seen this struggle even in athletic training. Where people come from different backgrounds. Am I talking about rehabilitational science or am I talking about preventative medicine? Like, oh my heavens. You're teaching exercise, and basically if I'm rehabbing the knee, it would be the same if I'm strengthening the quads, would it not? Guys. So at any rate, you must establish a clear research purpose. That's really huge. Up front, tell your reader, what is the purpose of what you're doing? Okay? Continuous analysis of the practice is needed to establish validity of the application. Obviously, we've been talking about that. Analysis of the specific selected exercises is needed, and implications for case to group application. So those three red bullets that you see down there are things that you, as a community, and I will help you. I've said yes, I'm in. Kind of go about how to get there with this. So defining and identifying research. I want to just take you through these more classical ways of identifying. Again, for somebody reading papers that don't use these more classic terms, it's very confusing navigating what the heck they did. So experimental designs essentially are designs that answer, does my intervention have an effect? And these can range from quasi-experimental to pre-experimental to true experimental designs. And nobody's going to use that terminology again because we've lost the ability to write clearly to people who are not in our profession what it is we are doing. So when you start this, please come back to basic mechanics of identifying your design. You're seeking cause and effect here, okay? So if I test someone, do baseline tests, for example, then I train them, and then I do a post-test. I might even test them along the way. You got to be careful about that because the more I test somebody, there's that magic thing called test effect, right? I get better at what I'm doing simply because I know what the test is. So I'm not responding to the intervention as much as I am to knowing what's going to be on the test, right? So be careful with that. I still love pre and post designs for that reason because I'm a motor learning person and I know how we sneak and cheat, right? So random group assignment, huge, huge, huge here in experimental designs. Unfortunately, we live in the real world. So when we get people, and we'll talk about this in informed consent and IRB, when we get people in as our subjects, we also have to make sure that they're volunteers. I can't just recruit you guys. You're in here now, and now you're going to study, the door's closed, kind of thing. You know, so those days are over, and then I have to ask you, do you want to volunteer in this study? And then normally I do a sample of convenience. Dr. Reuter talked about this yesterday. If I tested you guys, it would be a sample of convenience because you're here with me at the PMA, and so I have access to you, right? You're a convenient sample. Still, with that said, so a true researcher would go, well, then we've lost some of our content validity already in our sampling methods. We've got a little bit of sampling bias already. This becomes a statistical application where we still use that 0.05 margin for significance, whereas when I was working at INE or Institute in the Balance Lab, we used a 0.02. Because these people came to us from huge random samples and we could literally randomly sample them in a more truer sense. But still, they had to give their consent, which means they're volunteers. So you can understand where we've gotten to in this day and age. But when you're randomly assigning them, again, there's also this protection in human subjects that they're not treated unfairly. You cannot withhold something that you think would actually better somebody and deprive them of that. So this is also an interesting issue. Usually we only see this argument come up when we're looking at therapeutic or medicinal rehabilitation trials when we legitimately, if we know that this intervention is going to benefit everybody, we cannot withhold it from the control group. So there are ways around that. Most of us won't find ourselves in that case. You're introducing an intervention or you're training, and this can range again from case to group to cross-sectional to longitudinal. Are you training them over time, testing them over time, following them for a number of years? Again, that came up yesterday, and I thought that was interesting. It's not. I don't think it's so much that you might be curious about, does it stick 6 months after they don't do it again, because you want them to keep doing it. So I think that might not be important to you in research designs. I think what might be more beneficial for us to initially really look at is what's going on, even in descriptive designs, what's really going on with that person. And if you get into experimental designs, what are you really doing and how is that behavior changing? And so how would that behavior change if it continued on for a year or 2 or 3 or 4, but not in the absence of it? And then typically quantitative analysis where we're collecting data that's numeric. That's what we mean, obviously, right? By quantitative, I've got numbers that I can plug into SPSS and let it do the work for me, as opposed to when we used to do ours by hand in my doctoral. Thank goodness for computers. Descriptive designs, I don't see a whole lot of these used very well in Pilates, and I think they can be a very powerful tool. These were used quite well in education through the 80s and 90s, and actually got us pretty far along in understanding what goes on in education. So the basic question in these are, what is going on here? So you're not intervening in any way. You're measuring existing behaviors. So they can be a very clean one-shot deal. I come in and I measure something, and I see if they correlate. For example, does core strength correlate to their ability to do a teaser? So for those, a quality teaser. So then I have to measure core strength validly and reliably, and we'll look at some of these measures. One of the most widely used test for core strength is a double leg lowering test. So you have to know how to administer that, how to measure that. And then you would have to quantify the teaser. Okay? And we did this quite a bit in my balance research, where we would have all kinds of balance tests, right? And one of the widely used balance tests in the dance world is the SEBT, the standing star test. And we were always comparing right to left, but there was no composite score. So I really couldn't say, well, if they can do this, the SEBT scores will increase. So I'm going to get a correlation because I need new numbers. So what we did, working with the people down at Virginia Tech, is we designed, and the University of Virginia, we designed scoring for it, and you'll see an awful lot of research out there on the SEBT reliability and validity based on this. This can range from historical to correlational. Again, you're seeking relationships or associations, and they can even have predictive ability if you get into regressions. Okay, and that's another statistical application. The sampling through volunteering or a selected cohort, again, almost always these descriptive studies can be samples of convenience. Again, they're a little unique and different from experimental in that I'm not doing anything to them. So they have their own truth in and of themselves. The trick to doing a really good descriptive design is using valid and reliable testing instruments. I can't just pull something out of thin air. Remember, one of my graduate students wanted to test core strength using a plank position. Like, show me the reliability on that. So we did reliability testing on that. The plank test correlates at the 9.90 level with double leg lowering. But oddly enough, it doesn't in all age groups. So again, now we have to look at, is this reliable? Who's it reliable for? It doesn't hold true for adolescents. Okay. So, and then you're recording existing behavior. You can do this through observation charts, questionnaires, and surveys. And so you guys have seen, so when you see surveys, questionnaire research, that's descriptive research. Okay? They're not doing anything, they're collecting existing behavior. And the data can be qualitative or quantitative. I myself loved mixed method designs. Have you ever seen that term, mixed methods? Where this is a mix between quantitative and qualitative. I get very concerned that numbers hide stuff, and we all can agree with that. But I also love numbers because they're true. It is the common way to identify stuff. But I also like to come in and describe what was going on, and I think you guys are going to be in that same boat, where you're going to have to be good note takers. We call them SOAP notes in the clinic. And so really observing and paying attention and how to notate what you're seeing in those changes in behavior. Start practicing that if you're not doing it. It's a really valuable tool for you to look at, what was I doing there and what did I see change? And sometimes a teacher will shift what they're focusing on and something changes differently. Has this happened to you? So this would be really good for you to know that it's almost scary, isn't it, that you have that much power. That you can come in and go, well, this week I'm really going to focus on shoulder strength because my 60-year-old women are looking a little weak in the upper extremity. And so you focus on that, and you notice when you come back 3 weeks later and start to really look at pelvic stability, right? And you've got them on the reformer doing the magic exercise that I hate. And then you notice they can't hold it. Whoops, because you haven't touched it for 3 weeks. So again, this is a way for you to kind of look at your practice, what's your practice doing and what's going on. This is the scientific research process. So for those of you who are not researchers, this is what we grew up on. Okay? If I'm writing a quality research paper or a proposal, either one, these still apply, these 4 on the left. You want to identify your topic, just a general idea. I'd like to look at balance. Okay? I'd like to look at, then I've got to go, well, I'd like to look at balance in young adults. Okay? You have to search and review current and relevant literature. So you've got to get it in that far so that you can get keywords that will get you out of the 20,000 hit range, right? Then you refine the topic. So you're in your search engine and you go, okay, wait a minute, I've got, still got 25,000 hits here, but I do want to look at research in young adults, or balance in young adults. And then furthermore, why? Who cares? What is that? So then this is a really good place to back up and go, am I even looking at something that's relevant or even necessary? A young adult should have, if they're normally healthy, should have normal ranges of balance, static, functional, and dynamic. So maybe I need to look at, maybe my question really is, do I want to compare that balance compared to my 50 and 60-year-olds I have in my Pilates class? Maybe that was what was driving the question. Do you know what I mean? So continue to query why you're asking the question you're asking. What do you really want to know? And then that refines your topic and narrows your scope, and then you can come up with your general question or problem. So it's kind of, if I come to it and go, I'd like to look at the difference between dynamic balance in young adults, in elders, okay, in a healthy population. If I start there, I might find that there's really nothing novel to know. If I start by going in that broader net that I said, I'm interested in balance, what do I want to know about balance? And I question myself and I do these steps, then I can come up with a more relevant topic. Might take me away from where I originally was, but what I found with students of research, even my graduate students, even doctoral students now, that they get stuck there on 2. They go out and research it, and they come back and they go, well, I found this, this, and this, and I'm like, well, is it even relevant? Is it a relevant topic anymore? Maybe we need to look around the door. We need to look at this in a different way. Is it now just known? And where can we go from there? Oh, I'm sorry. If you're going to collect data, then again, in this order, you would set up your hypothesis, you would plan the methods, you would obtain permission to conduct the research from an IRB, and I'm going to talk about this more because there are times when IRB is not needed. And this is new at the NIH right now, okay? So this is emerging data that is just being uploaded into their databases in these fall months. They're really struggling to get it comprehensively uploaded quickly. We're in the middle of changing IRB even at my university as a response to that. You're going to collect your data, and then you're going to analyze data and interpret results, and you're going to write about those findings. Sherry.
I'll say this later, but I want you to say more about that because we found that
IRB?
study you don't need an IRB.
Absolutely. I'm going to talk about that.
Okay, good.
Definitely going to talk about that. So considerations for the researcher, primary question, right? Do I have the knowledge and the tools needed to perform quality research? We were talking about this yesterday in our research committee meeting. And one of the things that I will be encouraging you to do along the way, and you're going to see it come up in various places, is to find somebody to collaborate with. A wonderful collaboration is somebody working in a studio who has incredible knowledge and is a certified teacher with somebody in a university setting or a clinical setting that has access to IRB, access to databases that you might not be able to get, that we get access to for free, okay? And so this collaboration is so fantastic. And this is how I started as graduate student, looking at when I compared a modern dance program to a traditional chair program, the Frankel method. You may, I'm old, but you may know it. So at any rate, that was my thesis. And so right then I had to find somebody who was a valid teacher of the Frankel technique, because I'm not. So, I mean, I could teach the modern dance part of it, but then I would contaminate my own study because I'm the researcher. So then I had to find somebody to teach my modern dance, somebody who could teach the Frankel exercises, and then go about it. And it was fantastic because I could just wear the research hat. You know, in your case, you could just be wearing your hat, and they're wearing their hat, and then the two come together for a wonderful piece of work. Research is a scope of practice, so to speak, and those who conduct research should have the proper credentials, tools, and or environments to do so. I am not saying that everybody who does research needs ABCs behind their name. I'm saying that you need the proper tools, credentials, which you have as certified Pilates teachers because you have a certification. When we look at this in athletic training, because athletic training is actually not that old to research. I've been around when there were no Ph.D.s at the NATA. When I would come to the table, us who were associate members of the NATA were developing research for them. Now they have their own ATCs, which they don't like to be called, PhDs, and people who are doing their research. They've really built this, and this has taken many, many decades to do, and they do it very well. Okay? And we see similar tendencies, but this has been a richer, longer history in physical therapy. Align with other colleagues. The certified Pilates instructor should be able to access, evaluate, talked about this yesterday, interpret, and apply the research. So considerations for the researcher if you want to wear that hat, okay? Or if you're looking at somebody to collaborate with, do they have this hat? The researcher must be open-minded and honest. This is just ethical. Bringing no personal disposition to the research process. If Ariana thought that the Fletcher method was going to improve his subjects, and he just felt that to the point that he could will that to be so, that's called research bias. And this is why it's always nice for the researcher not to be the person either conducting the test or primarily conducting the training. Because, let's face it, you can kind of influence, like every once in a while with my dancers, I'll say to them, I want this to happen or that to happen. And when I say it, I can make it so. But when I bring in another teacher, can they make it so? You change behaviors in your Pilates practice, but can another teacher teaching the exact same thing do the same thing? These are issues that we struggle with in research. Now you start to really see how many holes can be poked and why I have wrinkles staying up at night over this. So contamination, bias just results in false reporting, poor quality research, and it can be so well masked, it's frustrating. Okay? Most researchers have advanced degrees with coursework or supervision in research, whether they've done a master's thesis or a doctoral dissertation. Most PhDs have done both. Okay? And it's reviewed by a group of faculty. These academic papers, the theses, and the dissertations are reviewed by them. The best researchers, however, notice in red, have a relevant question with excellent application of the scientific process. So again, I'm not saying that you need the credentials, but access to them can take you to places that will improve the quality of your research. Okay? You might have the best question, and you find your friend at the university. I have a friend now that is working in a studio out in Oregon, and she's gone to the University of Oregon because I said, hey, I've got a really good friend that teaches dance there. Go talk to her, and now they're working together on research. Okay? It's great collaboration. Are you working within your scope of practice? The really wonderful thing about working and talking with people who have certifications or licensure is you have a stated scope of practice. Know your scope of practice, and are you working within that scope? This brings up legal and ethical issues, which clients or subjects can come back and go, hey, you did something to me that you didn't have the knowledge to do, okay, or was outside of your scope of practice. Okay, this is where teachers and education really has a problem with this, because many times teachers are put in situations where they might be functioning outside of, not even in a willing way, where you could get sued for a student being injured on the playground. Really, it's not in your job description to monitor the playground. So we have lots of considerations here. You can critically review and write about your research question instead of collecting data again, and the researcher must adopt and follow this method. We're almost at a stopping point here, so if you can stick with me a little bit. Yeah, go right ahead.
I was just going to say that we've been running into a little bit of a sticking point where you're doing an intake form and you need to acquire relevant information, like do you have fibromyalgia or do you have a herniated disc? These are questions that you want to know if you're working with someone.
Right.
If by them saying yes, are you presenting yourself as someone who is within the scope of practice to deal with this issue?
Who can answer that? Certified Pilates teachers. Is it within your scope, Sherry?
If it affects exercise,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
If it affects the way you're going to teach exercise. Someone with diabetes it's probably not a good example because they can have foot numbness.
Neuropathy.
Yes, they have no sensation.
Right.
That could have an issue with falling down because of equipment because they can't
Right.
feel it with their feet. But if it's something like a mental disorder that's more of a cognitive issue that's not going to affect their ability to understand instructions of exercise, then it's not relevant. But relevant, what's in the PMA study guide? All those were chosen because they would change the way you teach the exercise because you could injure the person if you did wrong.
What Sherry's really driving at, what she's really driving at is this. You're not saying that you're going to treat the symptom or the disorder.
Right.
You're going to administer exercise, but not to treat the symptom.
And the other thing is, we had a big issue about this, about trying to decide what to put on our questionnaire.
Right.
And medication list is only for, and you have to kind of put this in parentheses, medication list to give to emergency professionals if EMS is activated. Right, if you call 911, you
Right.
need to be able to give a list of medications. It's not implying that I understand
What they're for.
manifestations of those drugs.
It's very similar to what we saw happen in personal training early on, because you can only activate and collect other healthcare professionals. You can only do so much. Where a certified Pilates teacher you do have CPR training. Yes, you have to. So, so again, that's a scope that you can follow, but you can't go with that. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it is. It's just,
To some degree.
Yes, it absolutely does.
Mm-hmm. There are so many legal loopholes that people, when you live in Italy, it wouldn't be a question, right? So, but at any rate. Okay, so informed consent, really huge here. Okay, so I want to take time here just to really address this. If you start testing human subjects, Dr. Reuter summarized this yesterday about the various things that were going on. But I would also, I'm going to show you some links here in just a minute. So I provided links for you to go to, and you can read forever on this topic. But primarily, the Belmont report is one of the most comprehensive reports that really looks at this. And the bottom line to informed consent is, you are trying to protect that person from any risk or injury that you may inflict upon them. It's okay. So you're protecting them from yourself. All right? And so that's important to know. Your scope of practice or expertise is important in this way. So in other words, if you can administer Pilates exercise because you're a certified Pilates teacher, this is muddy water right now. If I'm not a PMA certified Pilates teacher, can I conduct research and administer the exercises? I've got news for you. I don't know the answer to that question. And that's a question, again, that you're struggling with right now as a growing, relatively young profession to research. Although research has been going on in Pilates since the 1940s. I went back to the 1940s. Think about this. So talk about, and this is unfortunate because it was just going on so haphazardly that it continued to lose credibility along the way, to the point where now in 2016, most people are like, well, whatever they're doing, who knows what they're doing. So these are things that we have to pay attention to. No data can be collected. It doesn't matter if you have to go through IRB or not. And I want you to understand this. If you're doing case studies, IRB is not required, but consent still is. And in consent, I've provided a sample consent form on the next slide for you again. I want you to, and you can even just query, Google human informed consent, and there are all kinds of them. Here's the essence of an informed consent. You just want to make sure you're telling them exactly what you're going to do to them. And I mean to the last letter, okay, to protect yourself and to protect them so that they can say, I don't think I want to do that, okay?
Does that risk contamination in your study then?
This is always a question, and this is actually why informed consent was skirted early on, because the researchers in the United States, this just didn't happen in Europe. We did our own set of really good abuse in the United States to our population. We just did, and we did it so effectively, large amounts of people, that they thought, well, we can't tell them because if they know, then we're not going to get the results that we want. Too bad. Okay? So, for example, if I have to tell them that you're going to do this, this, and this, and you're going to be tested in this way, this many times, it's going to require this much of your time, okay? Or you may be in a group that gets no treatment. So it really is, it's identification. It doesn't affect your results, though, particularly in a study where they might be randomly assigned, so they don't know where they're going, so it shouldn't influence their behavior. The bottom line to that, though, Kathleen, it's a great question, is you're dealing with human beings. And so we're already wrestling with a bear, right? Because who knows what they show up with that day. So they're already bringing their bag of tricks to you, and you just have to sort through that in what we call demographics. So I also want to hit on assent. How many of you are familiar with that term, assent? If you are dealing with people who are not adults, even if you are dealing with people who cannot give their consent voluntarily themselves, they are mentally or clinically ill, they will never understand what you're asking them for, they have to be provided consent by their guardian, and I hate to tell you, at some point, they have to be able to understand what you're doing. So you've got to make it understandable. If you're dealing with, I did some research with children. We write these little forms that says, I'm gonna do this, this, and this. You can use pictures. Would you like to do this? You can stop at any time. You don't have to stay. It has to be written in their language, and then they go, okay. And then mom and dad okays it. Now, I always like to do, and this is the way I grew up in research methods, the direction on this should be, there is a query to the parent that a study is going to happen and your child might be asked for assent. Are you okay with this? Like a general thing. If they go, yeah, okay, no problem, then it goes to the children. Then an informed consent goes back to the parent. Your child has now given me assent. Are you also giving me consent? So it's a three-pronged approach. Okay. Retrospective reporting, which is used in some case reporting, meaning you might be reporting something that you did last year and you've now decided, I should write that up. This could be really relevant. Needs consent for treatment of a human subject and or release of the information. So even if it's anonymous and you decide to release this a year later, you've got to go back. If you did not collect consent from that person, you have to go back and now request consent to release the information anonymously. Okay? But let's face it, lots of times when you're releasing information about people, the demographics start to define this person. You're defining where you're working or who you are. people can trickle back down and figure out who this person is. So I don't, the word anonymity sometimes is kind of questionable. Like if I'm identifying that I'm doing research at California University on D2 soccer players, then all somebody has to look at is the roster of soccer players. There's my potential list of soccer players. We live in a day and age where just a click away, I can find out who that person is. So I think anonymity is something that we're going to really be struggling with in this new day and age. Some facilities require consent of a supervisor to release existing data on anonymous subject data. In other words, if you're taking data from a clinic or data from another from a studio that you're working in, your owner of that studio should also be aware of what's going on. And then training certificates may also be required by some facilities to see if you are qualified to be doing what you're doing. Okay? And I always like to see those myself. Graduate students come to me. I just worked with a doctoral student who did a beautiful study on functional movement screening, which I have issues with both ways, but he did a really nice, clean study on it, and we worked very hard at it, but he had to get certified on all levels of being able to administer that test before he and I could have the conversation. Okay, so informed consent form, it has to be valid, detailed, confidential. You're ensuring an anonymity, and you keep these forms away from other people. Okay, so you have to now become the keeper of the information, and you also have to be able to provide safe and competent treatment, which includes knowledge of results. What was found out and what could be reported with a good template there. You can check that out at rit.edu. Child assent forms must be written, again, so that the language is explainable, and I left you also a good sample there to look at your leisure on how these can actually be. You can be very creative with them, okay? It's not that we're talking that they're legally binding. It's that you have worked within your scope, you have gotten informed consent, you've provided information, so this gives you a lot of backbone. The main thing to know, though, is am I doing what I can do? Okay? Institutional review boards. All right, so the IRB is needed when you are doing research from a facility that has IRB. All educational facilities at the university level and college level have IRBs. All clinical facilities have review boards. All medical professional buildings have review boards. They're in place. So this is wonderful if you collaborate with somebody. If you want to do a descriptive or experimental design, they have this at their leisure. I noticed in your study that collaboration with the Fletcher studio and hinging on his IRB. Okay, so this is important and very good for everybody. It's needed for experimental group or cohort designs, some descriptive designs involving groups. Sometimes if you're doing, I know this is new at the NIH, the National Institutes of Health. Again, it may be different for every country that I'm talking to here, but every country does have a review process. Okay, so you all know that. So descriptive designs that are, for example, I'm answering a survey that came to me over Google Docs or any random online handler, and I decide I want to click on it and I want to take it. You're anonymous at that point, and by clicking, yes, I'll take this survey or questionnaire, you're relinquishing your right to consent. You're providing them consent by taking it. So there's no formal consent by you. Most IRB approvals then are also waived. This is very new, okay? So again, it's an anonymous response. If it's classically anonymous, the NIH has decided, well, then why do we need to go through reviews of these cases when we really can't get back to the person? We're actually looking at data points now. IRBs may also not be needed. This is what it's called right now, changes to the common rule. The common rule, again, was established after such abuse to human consent. Human consent is linked inextricably to IRB. The main goal of the IRB, I worked on our review board for a number of years, but I had so many proposals coming through that were my students it was easier for me to step off than recuse myself constantly, was that we just have to make sure that the consent is meeting the demands of what the design is. So always be thinking that IRB review is to protect human subjects. It's not to comment on your research design. And somebody brought that up yesterday. They can't say, well, you can't do Pilates, or what are Pilates? Dr. Reuter talked about that, right? But they can say, I don't have enough information here on what you're doing with this person or how much time you're asking them to provide. You're saying you're going to test them and train them. What's this really going to add up to? They need to know this up front. Okay? So check that out. Lots of information, but bottom line is 4 case studies, case reporting, certainly probably would not be needed. This may be different for where you work, though. Always check with your facility, and if you're teaching in a school, always check your chain of command, right? So you go back through whatever your chain of command is. Bottom line for the researcher, be responsible and knowledgeable about what you're doing and how you're doing it. Do you have the necessary skills? Protect your clients' and subjects' privacy. All forms, any data you collect from these people should be locked in a secure place. I just have a filing cabinet, and that's where all the research goes. I still have files on old floppy disks from my dissertation. Of course, you wouldn't want to get them away because I'd lose them. Then somebody would come back and go, did you really do a dissertation? So at any rate, you would always reduce any and all potential risk of participation in the research. If you know something might hurt them up front and you're thinking, wow, this could be an issue, then you probably need to deal with it up front, not post, right? Keep all data in that secure location where only you can access it, and read many sample research papers that are similar to what you're wanting to do. This is a really good way to also start identifying quality research and see if you want to model it, how you're going to morph it and make it better, and then evaluate the research for quality and clarity. We will be talking about developing clear, and that's what we're going to be doing next. If you guys want to take a 5-minute break? Okay? All right. I want to make sure I get through to some of this research. So let's go ahead. This is what we're going to be talking about. Again, the on your PMA app, if I'm not mistaken, if you go to presenters, this presentation in its entirety will be up there as a PDF, okay? Identifying a topic. Again, we talked about this, so some of these slides I'm going to go through a little faster, okay? If you need more information or you're not understanding where I am in this, just please give me a heads up. Again, this is the time where we might be talking back and forth a little bit. Again, you want to go through those steps where you cast that wide net, check what's going on in the research, then come back in and narrow your scope so that you have a good quality discussion. Too many times research is spent on something that just is not relevant, doesn't add to the literature in any way, and who is going to read it? So again, just because it's something you want to know, you have to keep thinking professionally. What is it adding to this profession? Okay? And it can come from what you're seeing in the practice. You have to make that connection. Searching the literature. You have to use scholarly databases. And they need to reflect your area of research. I've listed a whole group of them here. Most of these databases you will not have access to. They are paid for. When you collaborate with your university or clinical friends, they have access to them. However, one of the richest free databases is PubMed. It is loaded with Pilates research. So if you just go to PubMed and type in Pilates, they will ask you if you're talking about plates, and you just stick with Pilates, and you get the scroll down, you'll see a whole bunch of Pilates stuff. They're doing an incredibly good job at finding and housing your research. And all of the journals there, by the way, are scholarly and peer-reviewed, as are the databases listed there. When you search, however, you'll notice when you start searching, if you've never done this formally, on all search engines, they'll ask you if you want a scholarly, peer-reviewed, or all information, which could pull up magazines, newspaper articles, always click on scholarly peer-reviewed, and that will narrow your scope narrow your search right from the start. Okay? So always limit to peer-reviewed, limit to academic journals if that's an option. That further brings you into good, valid information. Start search with a large comprehensive report on the topic. I always suggest this. And this is why. You want to go for that pot of gold. A pot of gold is a really good comprehensive lit review or a systematic review or a meta-analysis. And here's why. Because they have looked at the literature on your topic and they've summarized it for you. So in one shot, you get a look at what's going on in your topic. The first thing my research students do is report to me on this, what I call a comprehensive secondary report. If they can't find it, then change your topic. Okay? Something within that area, the umbrella that you opened for your purpose statement, it's got to be in there somewhere. Okay? And this may just be, again, your refining process that needs a little fine-tune there. It also provides consensus on the topic, and these are high levels of evidence, which we'll be talking about. Then focus on your current primary original research. You want to look for articles that people have conducted the research and are reporting them directly. The authors of the paper are the researchers. Read to get the idea of the research purpose and plan. So if you're not comfortable reading complex research, this is the way to go about it, okay? Read to get the idea. So 2 things you want to know. What did they want to know? What was their purpose? And here's where this gets a little frustrating, because some people are not good writers and they're published. You know, this is what, you know, I love when I am on editorial boards, or I do and I don't, because that's always one of my biggest points is I don't see a clear purpose statement. And sometimes they'll say it something like, well, we thought we would look at this. And I'm like, what, did you look at it? Which could you tell me? You know, the purpose of this research was to spit it out, okay? I shouldn't have to look for your purpose. I shouldn't have to guess what your plan was. How did you do this? How did you sample your subjects? Who were they? How did you test them? What did you do to them? Okay? It should be clear. I shouldn't have to be confused by this. What was the plan, in other words? What did they find? So again, while a lot of people shy away from statistics, you should be able to figure out what the results were. This is the worst place for researchers, I have found, second only to not identifying a good purpose. That they start all over the place, and the way I was taught, I absolutely love it and recommend it highly. You go back to what your hypothesis was. First thing you say in your results was, if your hypothesis was that core strength was going to correlate highly with a quality teaser, however you identified quality, okay? And then in the result you say, statistics determined that the quality teaser was correlated at this level to the double leg lowering test, to core strength. Right off the bat, I shouldn't have to think about what you're telling me, okay? And then what was their interpretation of the findings, conclusions, and recommendations? So don't skirt results. Again, you're also looking for words like significant. I've found more and more researchers not using that term correctly and not using that term. It's either statistically significant. That is a term in and of itself, a research term. It's statistically significant or it's not. If it is not, it is not. Everything is tested generally at the 0.05 level, meaning we have about 5% of error in saying that what we found is what we found, to make a long story short. Sometimes it gets closer, like we used to do at 0.02.
I was just going to say, I think you did a great job of that.
Beautiful job of that.
We found increases, but they were not statistically significant.
Beautiful.
That's exactly what
And I like when they say, well, the trend was, I'm like, oh, no. You know, and I think that term can be used after you tell me if you found anything significant. So if you had not found anything significant, and I think you did at one point, you know, the trends indicate, It's going that way, and with more data, we might get there, or at least so that we have an idea. But look for that term, statistically significant. And if you never see it, it could be a fabrication. Okay? They're not really telling you because they really didn't find it. Evaluating the literature. Is this research report high quality? You want to check the design and methods carefully. And I use, and Sherry actually has an excellent article on this way back when, posted on levels of evidence. Now, there's a lot of different of these little pyramids. And I use this one for you primarily because in evidence-based practice, you'll see randomized controlled trials at the top of this pyramid as the highest level. Okay? I used this one, and I want you to check out, if you want to know more about it, the website there, the academic guides, and even the Oxford guides that really get into, again, why and how these pyramids are decided. Because right now in Pilates, what we need are summaries of what is out there so we know where to go. And this is definitely something I'm going to be talking to you about in what I found. We are starting to go where we need to be going. We're going there very slowly, and we still got problems with our methodology reporting. So we're going there, but we got to clean this up really quickly. Okay. Note that cohort studies. So here we've got up here what I've been talking about: systematic reviews, critically appraised topics. Okay, and then we have randomized controlled trials, which again are still in those upper tiers. They really are. Cohort studies, which mean these are samples of convenience. You already have these cohorts existing. Okay, and then case-controlled studies. Notice that they're at the lower levels, but they're still contributing to the body of knowledge, which is important. And what you're trying to do right now is grow a body of good knowledge, a body of informed quality research. And to some degree, you're almost starting from scratch. Almost. You've got good stuff happening. Melissa's report yesterday, if you were listening to that, her systematic review, when I read it and I highlighted here, was phenomenal. Done perfectly and really gives you a look at. And notice what she said at the end of it. I can't quite tell you if this is really working because of methodological quality. So that's what we keep talking about. Again, after you review the literature, formulate your question again to be clear. This is methodology. Who, what, when, where, and how. And that's just the way I like to think of it. Be really detailed. If you think you're going into too much detail, you're probably close. Okay? I used to love to do creative writing, and anymore it's almost hard for me because technical writing is so much easier. It's so easy. What are you really doing? And I find people really struggling with this because they were taught in English, they were actually taught creative writing. We don't teach technical writing. And writing research is technical writing. So if you do technical report writing, this is really a good place for you. Okay? Who are they? What is the design? What are your instruments? When, where, and how will this research be done? Those are your procedures that you see. And then how will you analyze your data? And this is where you, again, might need that collaboration with somebody if you're not clear on statistics. I also see in some of our research, Pilates research, not incorrect statistics, because again, I can use a whole bunch of different statistics for the same data, same question, but there are some that are more powerful and more applicable to what you're doing, and it behooves you to use quality research, because boy, athletic training just went through some real growing pains because us Ph.D.s were going boom, 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 just picking them off, going, why in the world would you do that? Why would you use a chi-square when you can use an ANOVA? Why are you using, non-inferential statistics when you can use inferential statistics, blah, blah, blah. And it's really helpful when you can get to that term, statistically significant or not. Okay? And nothing, by the way, is insignificant. That is not an acceptable term. So if they say the results were insignificant, then they just probably don't know what they're talking about. Yeah. Okay? So again, we're going to check this paper here. Let me see if I can pull this one up for you. Glasses in my hand. I want you to take a look at, let's see, how can I get paper over here. I'm trying to link to this, yeah.
You can't do it during the
Okay, that's fine then, that's fine. I can, because I can give it to them.
Okay.
It's not a problem. I just need to pull it up for myself then.
Oh,
Okay, so when you see PDFs on here, they're on my computer for me to see, obviously, but you're not going to be able to link to my computer to get to them. But I did give you the actual URL so you can get back to them if you want to look at them.
These slides are all on your app.
Yep, yep.
You go to her, scroll down to the bottom. The outline is there, that's in your booklet, and the slides are all.
Right. This study looked at, does Pilates exercise increase physical activity, quality of life, latency, sleep quantity in middle-aged people? Okay. So I selected this study, and I want you to read it at your leisure because I want you to read it for quality. I was really astounded by its in perceptual and motor skills, which kind of astounded me that it showed up there. But it was very interesting to me how really well written it was. And it made me ask the question that I'm going to ask you guys, even in just looking at the title. Does Pilates exercise increase physical activity, quality of life, latency, and sleep quantity in middle-aged people? Who were their subjects? Middle-aged people. What were they testing? So it's right there, right? So, and then did they train? Can you tell from this title, did they train anybody? Was this an experimental study, do you think, or was it descriptive? It's experimental. Does Pilates exercise increase it? So, or could they have done descriptive? Yes. They could have come in and measured all of these, physical activity, quality of life, and they could have said, taken it from a cohort of people who traditionally practice Pilates. How many days a week do you practice? What type of Pilates? Blah, blah, blah. And they could have collected all that data, and then they start to see, do these pieces correlate to one another? This study was interesting because they found improvements. It was an experimental study. They found improvements on all of these. And what you're going to be finding if you start getting into your research is quality of life, like I said yesterday, is the one that is coming to the top. It keeps coming up like a bobbin for me, you know. And people are measuring it in bizarre ways, and there are, of course, instruments that specifically measure quality of life. But I'm thinking that you might be onto something interesting, and is the essence of Joe's work, that you're changing somebody's quality of life, which is hard to define. But how do you say, I don't know, I just kind of feel better. I really like how I feel when I'm done with Pilates. How do you measure that? I think we might have to figure out a way to measure that.
And would that be through the work of psychologists, like you have the parameters for those types of questions?
I think it wouldn't take a psychologist to answer that question.
Yeah,
I think
you get that idea of scope of practice, and are you asking the right questions?
I love that question. Okay, that is somebody thinking really deep. So that's great. So if I find the instrument that is going to measure quality of life, and they used a good instrument. When you look at this, it's good reliability. Okay, and it's used widely in the research. That's validity. Okay, and they use it, and you are using it to determine what? They're using that measurement to determine if Pilates influences it. So are you within your scope? You're treating them and training them on Pilates. So you're not changing their behavior on quality of life directly. Your intervention is your tool, Pilates exercise, and then you're measuring it with these instruments. Yes, yes. Again, you need to collect good information, but please don't just what I call go fishing. You have to identify to your subjects what you're asking of them. So I can't just take, everything down to your bra size, okay? I need to be very careful about what it is that I need from you, and I have to clearly tell you in that informed consent what I'm going to ask of you, what information I'm asking from you. And it has to be relevant to my question. Okay? And my graduate students, they just, they come back in with these sheets, like their demographic sheets are like 25 questions. Like, what are you doing? No. Go again, start over, And so, again, this is also the place where you put limitations. What are your inclusion of subjects? What should they look like, and what can you not deal with? And a couple of the researchers, you guys did, an excellent job identifying exclusion data, exclusionary criteria. What could they have? They couldn't have. I love the fact that they said they couldn't have exercised in the last 6 months, because then we get somebody who's coming in that is more within that sedentary category, which is basically what you were looking for. Okay, so very, very, sampling is key. You want what we call equitable sampling. It's got to be an option for everybody. So I can't, unless I'm refining, I'm looking for a specific place. So let's just say I'm looking at you guys, and I go, I want subjects, and I want them to be male and female, okay? But, just kind of arbitrarily say that you can't really, be over 50, unless that's my criteria of my study. So I can't just kind of haphazardly decide who I want to use. Again, what general population do they represent? That's also a critical factor. You have to know who it is you're trying to project these results onto. That's called generalizability. And then select a sample that's more like them. Free from coercion influenced by the researcher. This is critical for you to understand. If you're the Pilates teacher and you are wanting to research your students, I can't do that. I'd love to test all my subjects, my students over the years. I would have so much data, I would just have to live to 100. But it's hard because they're your students and they want to please you. And so it's better if you go over and use Miranda's students, or Bill's students, because they're not your students.
Would you, in that case, observe, like you could take your soap notes while they're training, like if you
Sure.
Be present and watch, and then evaluate from there?
You have to be careful on your presence when they're being trained or tested at all, because that could be misconstrued. You would actually have to have your teacher do those types of observations, or you can have a research aide that just has to be identified in your class that has the ability to take those types of notes. So no, you really can't be a fly on the wall. Good question. You all know the day and age that we live in. You cannot video somebody unless they have been informed of this in writing in their informed consent with another release form. Okay?
That's the way you as a researcher can make observations without affecting their
I was
situation.
just going to say that. I actually did this for part of my dissertation, where I filmed them on the apparatus. Okay, or somebody filmed them for me. Then I went back and reviewed it. But I identified in the informed consent that this film will be used for further data analysis and extraction of information based on your performance by the researcher. So that they knew at some point I was going to look at them. But it would be after the research was completed.
But I bet you also there would help you get a third-person view of what you're doing to evaluate your method, just so you can say, oh, this is what I did, and then sort of get a critical eye on what you're doing too.
I think it's important when you step out as a researcher, and that's a good point, because again, you want to see something. It's hard. We're all human. You want to see something, and sometimes, especially when you're doing observation, you can make it so. That perception, right? If I want to see it bad enough, I maybe can see it. Whereas another objective pair of eyes may go, nope, sorry, not there. Like I'd love to tell you guys that posture is related to static balance, but it isn't. Okay? Somebody can come and stand like this and stand on one leg just as long as somebody's standing perfect posture on one leg. Why? Because they figure out a way to get all those pieces over base of support. It drove me crazy. I researched it for years, and I just was, even on my exit interview and my postdoc, I'm like, I'm going to lose my hair over this, I'm sure someday. Why? And even knowing why, I knew why. you're going to know why, and you're not going to want to give it up. You know, you're just going to beat it. You're just going to beat it. Okay, and then again, you've got to get that informed consent to them. It must be reviewed before you do anything to them. Take any information from them. They've got to sign it, and I also like the binding contract where I sign it too. So everybody's signature is on there. Research design, again, define your design with the assumptions and limitations of the design. Okay? You want to control as many extraneous variables as you can. Again, these experimental or random controlled trials are important for comparing Pilates to other types of interventions with a control group. But again, I want to just say this. So let's say that we compare Pilates to a Pilates group to a control group. And we do this experimentally because we're going to train the Pilates group and we're not going to train the control group. That's a true control group, okay? And so at the end, I find that Pilates was significantly better than the control group. Is Pilates the same as yoga with those results? You can't say, can you? You can only say that Pilates was better than no training. That's all you can say. This was the question I was leading to in the research session yesterday when I said, or I liked the question that was asked, did you measure low back pain? If you didn't measure low back pain, you can't tell us that low back pain was improved. Okay? Now, it would have been really cool had low back pain been measured, and then you could tell us. There's only so far you can stretch your information. It's called extrapolation or generalization. Okay, so you have to be honest about that.
The thing is, rib mobility wasn't measured, so there's no way you can say, remember Brent Anderson's question about rib mobility.
Exactly.
There's no way you can say that rib mobility had to do with the decrease in pressure because he didn't measure it.
Right. So these are things that we've got to watch for. How many of you thought of that when you were sitting there? Did anybody say, hey, well, where did he pull low back pain out of? You know, and again, I'm not being critical of his research. I'm getting us to think about, did I see that? Like, if you were reading this, if this were in a journal, would you go, I'm not sure you can actually say that. This is what I want you to be aware of, okay?
Will IRB approve negative control when it comes to rehabilitation?
See, again, IRB will approve this because it doesn't have anything to do with the treatment of the subject. That's what I want you to...
Preventing treatment of the subject.
For a control group?
Yeah.
But a control group is no treatment. This only applies withholding that we know something will make somebody better or will impair their further decline of physical health. These are very rare.
That we're going to cure them or help them, right?
But you're not. You're not. What she's asking is, would the IRB then look at a control group as a way of withholding treatment for somebody? These are only going to be found in clinical studies where a life or death situation or mortality is involved, because again, you've identified that in your informed consent to that person that you may receive no treatment. But it can be overseen only if it has clinical ramifications like that. That's a good question.
I have a question on the sampling.
Sampling.
Back a little bit. The intervention group, can it be a paid program?
One more time.
Can it be a paid program?
Yeah, that's the patient.
That they pay for it. Well, no. We just stepped off the moral platform there. No. And if you think about this, be logical in your logical mind. Think about why this would be. If they're paying, you're talking about them paying you.
Not me, but like if I were with like the facility.
But they're paying a facility and they're being studied.
And have like an intervention group that it's a paid program. And
You can pay them to participate in your study, but it can't go the other way. It can.
Everybody was being paid, unless the control group was paying for
on their
as
subject,
well.
on their clients. If the client is paying, is that an issue? Yeah. Right, if it's a client that's paying for private sessions, and you say, would you like to participate in a study?
You are really on thin.
So we need to have that, I don't have that right now as
Very, very thin water.
in the case report
I would say, I mean, you could certainly address this way. If this is identified in a case where this is clearly identified in their informed consent, but no, I'm telling you, I can't go there in my mind. I just tried, and I can't go there in my mind. Because they can always come back and say, I paid you for this service, and I didn't get what I wanted from this service, even if it's clearly defined in, it has to be a consent that's going both ways, free of, it would almost be an opposite form of coercion. Even what contract?
The contract that you signed, the informed consent contract.
Yeah, I'm having a.
Essentially, we can't be saying that throughout this series of, your 10 sessions or something, it has to be completely done separately. So
Well,
there's
see,
no
I think a lot of people are doing case studies retroactively too.
Yes, yes, and you see what happens when that happens.
They've been taking information in or calculating data, or measuring something.
From a client that was a paying client.
For a while, that has happened, and I said, if you have clear measures, you can use that, but
We've certainly seen this happen in clinical work. We've certainly seen this happen. Working in a very large facility such as Ioneer Institute, we work with ophthalmology, so the people with balance disorders, ear imbalances would come up to the balance lab, and we would work with them. And these were people paying to see people in ophthalmology, but they were not paying us to do research on them. They were consenting. This is very muddy water, and I saw athletic training go through this. In fact, it's built procedure. So, generally speaking, if your client is paying you and you are using that existing data, they would have to agree to that for sure.
An example too. I think I don't want to derail you from.
No, because we need to keep moving. But it's a good question.
They would be paying customers. Yeah.
So to get back to your question, there's a way around it. You have to just be conscious of this moral line, okay? Because where you stop as a teacher and you become a researcher is something that you're going to struggle with as a professional. I'm telling you this because I've seen it happen in athletic training. I'm sure you've seen it in PT.
So that would be different than a randomized controlled trial that's set up.
Very different.
Collecting data on
Very different.
outcomes for clients.
And this is why case reports and existing data is so controversial that the NIH has changed its opinion on it, which we're talking big change when we know they no longer say it doesn't even need reviewed. You just need to inform the person of this. So this is new emerging ground. But I think my cautionary note to you is just that. Understand where you stop as a teacher and where you start as a researcher so you don't contaminate your own results. Case studies are one of those very unique opportunities, however, that you have direct contact with this person. You're reporting their observation. You're reporting anything that you collect from them. And you might have been teaching them all along the way. That's why case studies also are not as high on the level of evidence. So this is the swap that you make for that. Very good questions.
This will be very challenging, I think, to grow research on Pilates if we say strict no to not like.
I think, and this is also why we do have to really stop and think what we're doing and how we need to go about it. I think you'll find when you read a little bit more on the NIH, if you go in there and look at that they would not have a problem with the subject paying you, but you have to inform them of that, okay? You just have to really be clear of that. At the university level, it's just something that we would never do, okay? And that's because we're doing something different. But I see it in the private industry as a huge issue.
Well, the next stepping stone, I mean, for instance, I've noticed patterns over 10 years of teaching, and yes, I have plenty of anecdotes and case history and session notes, but at some point you could develop your research from all those observations of paying clients and then form that study based on that where you then actually do it in an unpaid situation where you invite people to participate.
Yes, you certainly could go about it that way.
And have someone else execute it.
Yeah.
Right. But if somebody were, are you talking about using existing data, or are you talking about?
Well, you can take your existing data from past.
Yes.
And then create a new study that it meets all the requirements.
Yeah, I think that no one just walks into a Pilates studio having never taught Pilates and say, this is what I think was going to happen.
Yeah.
I think we all have these professional
It comes from a base
experiences
of
over.
experience.
Right.
You can use your own history of teaching to then
Yes.
develop.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Oh, yes, absolutely. Yes.
So I can
But
go to the nearby university to the science medicine and say, look, I've observed this. Is there anyone here at this research facility interested in, exploring if this is true?
absolutely, that's a good way to start a collaboration. Very good way. But remember, first thing a university faculty is going to ask you is, do you have consent to that information? Even if it's retroactive, even if 5 years ago, only 10 minutes. Oh my goodness. Do you have access to that? So you need to find those people and get their okay to release it, or a university faculty won't touch it. I'd be amazed. They could, but again, we get on that fine line of ethics. So I'm going to have to move quickly here because I want to get to the scope as well, but take a look at this. Again, this is just an example. If we're looking for core strength, one of the gold standards is still that double leg lowering test. It's in all clinical therapeutic X books. Again, note that this test is even similar to the Pilates double leg stretch. So there you go. Wouldn't that be interesting? If this is a gold standard for core strength, is the quality of their performance of these 4 exercises in Pilates, how do they correlate to core strength? That's a simple, clean little study. But again, you would have to quantify double leg lowering or qualify it, measure it somehow. Procedures, you just have to go step by step. The easiest way to do procedures is to make a list, and then you write it out after. What are you going to do first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth? Okay? And that should be clear to you. I won't go into data analysis because most of you are not comfortable with or know an application of statistics. This is just a good time to find somebody who is and ask for their help, okay? Because this is where you can make a critical mistake and then everything you did is meaningless and it will never be accepted. So again, you're looking for statistical significance. You're looking for a way to set this up, and I do talk to you a little bit more about how to handle case designs. Read the type of study that you're trying to model, and those are some of the best ways to get to that. How methods affect results. Real quick, you need to read the research methods to accurately interpret. So look at this. This is a study that you can pull up right here at the bottom. Subjects were 34 young, sedentary, healthy women. We have 17. What makes a good group? What's the magic number? People ask me this all the time. It needs to be at least 15 or over. That's just kind of the general consensus. So a group of less than 15 is questionable. You can do a power analysis on it, but generally speaking, 15 is acceptable. So, and this is a randomized control trial. Notice what all they tested for. They tested a whole bunch of stuff. Procedures for pre- and post-testing once a week. Again, this is a very clear paper, clearly written, a good I tried to give you some good examples. 60 minutes with a CPT using the correct method, and they identify this method in pretty good detail. My question to you is this. Would they find similar results if they used different methods? What would you say? Absolutely. Look at what all could have went wrong here. Look at the subjects. 34 young, sedentary, healthy women. Would they find the same results if they looked at elderly males? Right? Would they find the same thing using Pilates if they had used a different measure than sit and reach test for hamstring flexibility, and even could be argued low back flexibility? So when you're comparing, now you understand what we're up against with systematic reviews. When you're comparing these studies, it could be apples to oranges. So this is what we're talking about when we're talking about building validity in your field. I need to be able to do this type of thing again in a different population, Did I and test them the same way, treat them the same way? If I find similar results, now I can really say, wow, it not only worked in young sedentary women, it worked in middle-aged, healthy women, or whatever. What we are finding, though, is we're not finding much difference for people who are already trained. So if you're already fit, don't look for much change because you're already there. It's just like dynamic balance. We can't measure changes in proprioception or dynamic balance because it's already healthy in there. So where's it going? So here's my findings. I decided to do this, and this is where I went for my databases, so you'll know where I went. My overall findings, small sample of research, largely inconclusive results due to lack of reporting complete and detailed methodology. Again, taking us back to what is Pilates. This is an excellent paper, 2015 paper, looking at and struggling with this topic. And they came out with exactly what all of us are complaining about and arguing about in a very scholarly way, I might add. We don't know. And when they looked at what this paper does here, I want you to pull, when you get back, pull it up on the bottom. There's the HTTP for it, the URL for it. It will tell you exactly what we've been saying, that it's all over the place and we've got to get on this. Generally, low back pain, therapeutic exercise, and exercise are reported 2 times more than quality of life, with balance and posture training effect limited psychological research. Even in relation to that statement, quality of life, dynamic balance, and general strength may be gained, this is what the research is indicating, may be gained from Pilates training, particularly in sedentary and older adults. This is where your research is right now, sedentary and elderly populations, okay? And this is where we're finding, or if not, it's a therapeutic application or some pathological issues such as cancer, okay? I noted an increase of random controlled trials from 0 to 6 in the general databases from 2010 to 2016. That's a nice increase. And this is an increased systematic reviews and meta-analysis, 7 systematic reviews reported in 2016. Pretty darn good. What this indicates is we have an increasing level of evidence, but still a call for improved reporting of methodology. Research reviews, these systematic reviews, generally point to low to moderate levels of evidence in supporting Pilates exercise. And ask yourself, why is this? You know it works. You think it works. Is it really working? Or are we not researching it accurately? Are we not detailing? Are we not asking the right questions? My guess is we're not using the right instruments and we're not defining the right procedure. Okay? We're not doing what we think we should be doing to find what we need to find. Okay?
One of the things about this, the weaknesses of methodology, is that when we're taught, when we're trained in Pilates, is you adapt the movement to the body in front of you. So if you're doing that, it becomes kind of difficult to clarify or to follow strict methodology.
Then what you do, I love that question because there's an excellent, I give you the URLs for all the background on where to find these systematic reviews. Some of them really talk about, and you can go back and look at the randomized controlled trials in that, do this beautifully where they use exactly the terminology that Sherry started with, Pilates-based. So we used a Pilates-based program that involved progression from this to that, progression to straight leg, teaser to on and on and on. You guys are the experts. I don't want to expose my lack of knowledge there, but you know what your progressions were within the time frame. Do you get it?
Oh, I see what you're saying. So yeah, you have to get the person to that standard so that you can actually measure it. No, you just have to tell us what you did. Oh, okay.
What you did. So if you just did this exercise this way for 6 weeks, just tell us that. If you're saying, I noticed that they changed, okay, in research, I can't just change and not tell somebody that I changed. Progressive resistance, progressive adaptation is used in all types of exercise. You just need to inform your reader of that. Okay? And that's what's not happening. So these are just reviews on low back pain. So, I mean, I'm telling you, this is mind-blowing to me that we're not finding huge, like, my goodness, Pilates is the method to go to improve low back pain. And we're just not finding it. It does. There are some improvements, but they're still anecdotal because we're not getting conclusive evidence on it. Notice here, research indicates that Pilates does not improve non-specific chronic low back pain nor disability scores. And look at where these reviews are coming from. Thank you from people all over the world. Okay? Look how recent. That's why I wanted to do them currently, because these reviews have been going on since the 1980s. And we're still here. We're still here saying we don't quite know, okay? So a systematic review of 5 systematic reviews done in 2013, Wells out of Australia is doing some excellent work, by the way, really digging deep. Systematic review of 5 systematic reviews. Trends in the field indicate that Pilates method may improve pain over minimal exercise, but still need more evidence.
Don't read her reviews because they're depressing.
Very depressing. But one of the things that she brings up is we've abandoned some of the basic principles of Joe. Where's the breathing? Where are people talking about, I'm doing this and I did this with breathing? Just say, you did this with breathing. Because what it does is it holds you accountable. What did I do? Am I even doing what I should be doing? Remember all those little words at the beginning? Am I doing what it's supposed to, intended to, blah, 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 blah? Things that are going to keep you up at night now. Okay? So there. So general findings, 2015-16, current. Physical conditioning, 1 review. Notice the review tells you how many trials met the criteria to even be reviewed. When you go, wow, that's a few number. These people started with hundreds and then narrowed down. You heard Melissa talk about that yesterday, how the shoot went. Results indicate that Matarappers Pilates performed improves abdominal muscle endurance on average, 10 more abdominal curls in 1 minute test for both genders. Really cool findings here. Again, quality of life and muscle back flexibility, improved dynamic balance is coming up. Women's health, again, some of this is Melissa's work. Used 13 studies which were rated as low quality overall. Effects on breast cancer, pain, lower extremity. Hopefully we'll see yours added to that, showing some emerging evidence. So again, not statistically significant, but it seems to be that it's looking good for quality of life, pain, and lower extremity endurance for Pilates. On the elderly, notice this, 21 studies, lots going on in the elderly here. My findings in the current scope, these are systematic reviews 2016 and 15. Just take a look at those. You can find these easily by typing in the name. You can even Google the name and it will redirect you, or go to PubMed to find them. Rolls and rolls of them. I take you back to 2012 and you can really start to see what has been going on. Future directions here. Descriptive qualitative research on quality of life and physical changes in strength and balance may provide further insight. I'm kind of thinking that this is getting back to that essence. If you can find a way to get there, it might be really cool. This is an excellent paper. Please look at it on random control trials on patients and quality of life in multiple sclerosis patients. We need to locate valid and reliable instruments. You have to keep your eye on that ball. Need to clearly identify the practice of Pilates. Okay? Be clear about what you are doing. In conclusion, cannot underestimate the mind-body connection. We all agree on this. Quality of life seems to be most affected by Pilates practice overall to date. Ways to measure Joe's vision in the practice of Pilates, go back to your guiding principles. I reread the book, Return to Life, again this week before I came, and I've got cold chills on my arms. The man was a genius. He was just an innovator, and more people should know about what he was trying to do. We've got to tell people about what he was trying to do. Go back to the terms: concentration, control, centering, flow, precision, breath, relaxation, stamina. Are you teaching that? Is that what you mean by Pilates? Are you teaching that mindfully? Are you impacting them? Continue to report special cases. Is what you're doing working? Do that. What do we mean by working? I just want you to think about this. Have you seen changes in clients? What are they and why are they happening? What are you doing as that teacher? Again, are you feeling some back cramping, so you're doing more for the back and the thoracic release? And what are you doing that's affecting them? Clarity, detail, observe, record, review, evaluate, write. I always write this to my students, and it's never ending. And they go, Doc, don't ask Dr. Hess one question, because she's always going to tell you the same thing. Let's look that up. Okay? In Joe's words, I absolutely love this. I'm sure all of you have read this a number of occasions. You must always faithfully and without deviation follow the instructions accompanying the exercises, and always keep your mind wholly concentrated on the purpose of the exercises as you perform them. And think about your research in the same way. Good luck. It's really been nice talking to all of you. Thank you. Thank you.